You go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strike a Chord episode 9. We are very excited tonight to welcome visionary artist, activist, and educator Midori, one of the most outstanding violinists of our time. And before we get to our main event, I do want to let everyone know that next week on April 22nd, we will not be having our episode of Strike a Chord. Instead, we invite all of you to join us for a preview event. Later in the month, we're going to have an event called Rising Tides, focusing on the local impacts of climate change and addressing that through music with original songs by young composers here in the greater Boston area. And next Thursday, April 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we are excited to offer a preview of the full event on the 30th. So we do have Midori with us today. It's very exciting. As a leading concert violinist for over 35 years, Midori regularly transfixes audiences around the world, bringing together graceful precision and intimate expression. Midori is deeply committed to furthering humanitarian and educational goals, and it is these common values that bring us together today. She has founded and manages several nonprofit organizations, including Midori and Friends, which provides music programs for New York City youth and communities. And Eureka is proud to be working as a partner with Midori and Friends this year. In recognition of her commitments, she serves as a UN Messenger of Peace and will be honored in May at the 43rd Annual Kennedy Center Honors by the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. So without further ado, here is the Strike a Chord Eureka team alongside Midori.
Good evening, everybody. So nice. Happy Thursday. How is everybody doing tonight?
Doing all right. Doing all right. I feel like it should be, since it's just, I don't know, after all the accolades, Midori, you're fantastic. And after all the accolades, it should really be Midori and a Strike a Chord host.
Well, just to get things off the ground, Brittany, do you want to play our chord of the week?
Sure. Let me just turn on original sound. Get to my piano. Okay. What am I playing? Ooh, let me bring that up just a bit. Yeah, that was fun.
And what was that chord for our audience?
I believe it was an A flat 7, maybe 9. It was an A flat major with some nice extra tones in there. Just
awesome.
How I'm feeling
Perfect
today.
for a rainy day.
Yeah, truly. You know, rainy days bring out different perspectives and emotions of people. I'm not a fan, but I know some people that feel completely serene. And I know hearing that, it kind of has like the tension, but also the serenity of A flat major. So
wonderful. Well, speaking of feeling, Midori, how is your week? How are you?
I'm good. I'm well. Thank you. How is it going for you guys? It's raining here in New York.
Also raining up here in Mass.
Yeah, it was
It's
drizzling.
been a wet week.
Yeah, a little
Feels
chilly.
like A flat major ninth kind of day for sure.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, so we've been, in spite of the rainy weather, because we're all indoors anyway, we've been doing our work and keeping busy. Andres mentioned we have a Rising Tides program focused on climate change coming up. But Midori, what are some of the projects you're working on right now? What's keeping you busy?
Oh, there are so many things going on at the moment. It's a sort of a very exciting time going into this last stretch of what was a very, very strange season, I would say. We've certainly learned a lot. I certainly learned a lot about being online, about technology, things I never would even, imagine that existed, actually, about the internet. I learned quite a bit, and I'm grateful for that. I'm very proud that I was still teachable in that sense. But right now, I'm quite occupied, still, of course, the teaching of the lessons of my students, preparing for some of the concerts coming up, performances in Spain next week, as well as learning a new work by Derek Bermel to give premiere performances with 7 different youth orchestras in May and June. And this is a piece that was written particularly for the current time. In which he designed it, Derek composed it so that it can be rehearsed and performed online, live. And
Wow.
it's not particularly to submit a line or a part and then to put it together afterwards, but it's to actually do it live. So we're very excited about that. I just got the music
Wow.
for the second movement last week. First movement being for strings only and violin solo, and the second movement is actually, I should say, it's the third movement. The third movement is for winds only and violin solo part, and the middle part is something that he's going to work on after the pandemic is over. But it certainly is interesting to be learning and working on a piece that's going to be initially solely performed online. Different challenges that come from that, things to embrace that we hadn't thought of before, trying to embrace latency, for example. So that keeps me busy. And then we're, of course, at Midori and Friends going in for the final sort of several weeks of presentations of the signature series, which of course the Eurekas are a part of. And you, Alan, we're going to be playing in a quartet again.
That's
and,
right.
Creating content for music sharings, partners and institutions, as well as what normally would be a live concert in 2 different concert halls in Tokyo and Osaka. But this year we would have to do it by streaming. So lots of things coming up.
All right. Well, speaking of music sharing, so I had the huge privilege of working with Midori as part of her music sharing program in a quartet that went to Vietnam was it 2018, Midori, was that right? December, yeah, so to December 2018, and also to Japan in summer of 2019, where we were playing for different schools and hospitals, assisted living centers. And that's a great segue for one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Midori, which is, it has so much to do. There's so much that you do through your work as a humanitarian and a cultural ambassador. Music sharing, of course, is one of the vehicles for that. But I wanted to ask you, what are some of the major insights that you've gleaned over the years about the power of music and musicians through doing this kind of work, both abroad and in the U.S.? What have you learned from being in that position?
Well,
The relevance in the community at large.
Yeah, but it's something, it's so difficult to just explain in a nutshell. I've learned so much and I continue to learn, and there are new things. Our world is changing, of course. So, we continue to learn alongside all the changes that are happening around us. We hope to be learning. But I think one of the first things I've learned through ISAP was that, what I used to think of normal, or what I used to think of as the truth, there is subjectivity in all of this, and that there is no such a thing as truth with a capital T. And it's my perspective of how I see things. And I may share that with others as well, but I may also not share that. So one of the first things that I learned is that I'm a very subjective person. And I think we all learn that through this ISEP program. we also get confronted firsthand by different situations, difficult situations, extremely tragic situations that are difficult to let go from your memory.
Was there a particular circumstance or situation like that comes to mind that triggered that lesson for you? Like, whose truth? I think that's like a
there are
huge
just so
lesson.
many, and these are not just images, but sometimes just the way I felt, so I could feel that sort of goosebumps still remembering, or that's how I remember, or it's a scent, or whatever it is. Going into a very, very remote village, maybe not even a village, visiting somebody who hadn't had a visitor for so many months and years, going to a place where really musical sound is the only way to really communicate, or going to the garbage mountains, the smell of it, and then seeing these wonderful warm-hearted children, then knowing that they had just lost a friend the night before because of just being run over by the garbage truck during the night, as kids sleep in these conditions. Different things, visiting different institutions or villages or colonies, or however you like to call them, peace villages, peace village that we visited, a number of them actually in Vietnam, you might remember, Alan, where children have been affected by Agent Orange, and so they suffer today from what their grandparents might have been affected by for the Agent Orange, or visiting the elderly, or visiting the community where people at one point had suffered from leprosy or Hansen's disease. And these are wonderful experiences in a way, all put together. And the opportunity that I feel, how privileged I feel to have been able to connect with them, to bring music, to be in their presence, and to share the music, and to also sometimes for them to have performed for us, sharing their stories with us, their experiences with us. Sometimes it's a dance, sometimes it's singing, but sharing their lives, sharing their cultures with us. I think going to different hospitals, institutions in Japan, what it means for us to be able to even gain entrance to some of these places, correctional facilities. It's not always in the middle of the city. It's not always easy to get to some of these places that we get to visit. And you get surprised in a place like Japan how far some things feel. So these are all the lessons, that there's so many things that I've learned, feelings, just the experience of having been. And
what role did you see music like playing in these people's lives that you met? Because those are the variety of exchanges that you just described are, worth like 10 movies.
I think one of the most wonderful things about music is that it has no boundaries. It has no boundaries of what it can do. And for different people, it serves as different things. And in some cases, we were the sounds from the outside, the contact, the connection to the outside. For those especially who might have been confined, we are the sounds from the outside, from outside their windows, if there are windows. We are the ones that actually don't speak the same language, and that might inspire them. It might waken their interest in learning something that's more than just within their environment. It's an encouragement. It's a way to connect, that we are all connected, that it's a way to think beyond their own immediate environment.
And like relating back to the classical music field, right? Do you think the field represents that or those lessons, or should it? It's like, how do you take it to this platform of basically alleviating suffering for people?
I think I like to just say that one of the other things that I find is so moving for me during these ISEP visits. It's not only with the ISEP visits, but I noticed this first, I think, during one of the ISEP visits, is that how I can feel and I can see music changing us and the meaning of the music within us. It's not just for the people that we share the music with and playing for them, but it's also us, the players, those of us that have lived with classical music for such a long time. And as I work with the younger musicians, I see that music really makes us view the world differently, or it actually changes the relationship to our music. And at times I felt like music was in these trips, music was the only thing that we can hold on to. And how much it supported us and how much it helped us.
Speaking of supporting and being supported by people, I mean, this kind of engagement with communities that sometimes don't speak our language, but want to hear these voices from the outside or take something from that. I think it ties very deeply into the work that we do as well and that we value here, even if it's on a much more local scale. But we think about the philosophical underpinnings of this kind of work a lot. Christo's question about classical music's role in all this, I think, it indicates something that we all contemplate. Brittany, I think you had something you wanted to ask on this topic, which was very pertinent.
I did, and
also nice hat, Brittany.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. That's what I bring to today's podcast, is a bit of headgear. I'm trying to think of exactly how I worded it, but I know, Alan, you may have it since I also shared it with you. But Midori, if you could talk a bit about how your work through Midori and Friends, through all these other humanitarian avenues that you have, how that affects your own performance, how that affects maybe works that you possibly commission or just perform in concert, the work that you do with your students. How does that side inform your performance and teaching side?
Again, it's very difficult to put it in a nutshell. To simplify, I think, does a disservice. So it's very difficult to explain. But I would say that through all the experiences, I feel extremely, extremely, extremely privileged to be able to have had these experiences, to have met the people I have, to have worked with the people I did, and to share a meal or to share the music, to share the experience together. And I would say that it really has all these together as an experience. It becomes a single experience. It's like a tapestry. And that's, with so many different threads and beautiful threads, and it's very complex, and it gets more and more complex, and it just becomes so beautiful and meaningful, and also has more depth as it gets more complicated and complex. And I would say that my range of reactions, emotional reactions, has definitely expanded. And because my range of emotional reactions has expanded, I like to think that my range of being expressive has also changed.
Musically expressive.
Yes. Yeah. Well, if you're talking especially as a performer, as a player, that, it's just so telling as we experience life, that it's so beautifully complex that it's never one way or the other. It's not so clear. And that music is very much like that. It's clear, and yet it's so abstract. And because it's abstract, it's so possible to imagine. It's so possible to imbue your own feelings, and to be able to make it to what you want.
I think one thing that my colleagues and I, when we were working with you in that quartet in Vietnam and Japan, felt very strongly was, how being in those situations made us want to put in more effort to make sure that the music that we were playing had things that the audience could connect to, like really making things vivid in a way, and really trying to see and hear, even hear, like the kids who were coming up to us, perhaps at the school for the blind, where they were feeling our instruments, and that there's a certain reshaping of desire and motivation, I think, that goes into performance in those kinds of scenarios, and you take it back with you. And I know for my part that it's really shaped my perspective on music making and performance since
And
then.
I think it also, to a certain extent, makes you sort of lose yourself, to throw all whatever your immediate desires or wants, and to get sort of kind of get rid of your vices in a way.
Calls you to surrender is how I like to. You like surrender yourself to the moment and to the people that are there through your art.
Right, to the people, to the music. Yes.
Just giving as much as you can.
Yeah.
And like what I always appreciate about this art form is just that it puts you into the shoes of other people in a way that like just conversation cannot, because like you're feeling everything that everybody else is feeling, and do you think musicians hold a responsibility for that when they go to communities like you have, in terms of coming back to a place like the United States, which the economic baselines here in terms of healthcare and just living quality or quality of living are just so much so different compared to some of the areas you've just described?
Different, but I would not say that there is no need here. There is a great need. There is a great need everywhere. And we have to remember that there is subjectivity involved here. So there's always going to be that. And so, I happen to have gone to some of these places, but it also made me realize that there is need here, right in in our neighborhood. And so it makes me actually very motivated to do more. Yeah, just the need is just too much.
Is that why you started Midori and Friends, by any chance?
Midori and Friends was my first organization, and this was from 1992. And of course, we've grown. We're going to be almost year 30, so we will have the 30th anniversary coming up fairly soon. But yeah, schools were different back then. Situations were different. New York was quite different back then. And I was growing up in the 80s and the early 90s, and that's when I was sort of coming of age, and I was starting to perform. I was working with older colleagues, highly respected colleagues, and now I was always listening to them talk about but the lack of arts education, music education in the schools, in the public schools especially, and also particularly to do with urban centers, such as New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, Washington, D.C. And as I was listening to this talk, I really, really got inspired, and I wanted to start something on my own as well. I wanted to be hands-on. I wanted to participate in trying to change this trend that was looking like we were not going to have any arts education in the schools fairly soon. So I wanted to participate. I wanted to do something to try to bring an attention to the importance of the arts, what the arts can do to change the culture of a school. And so I started Midori and Friends in 92, not expecting actually that it would grow so much. I also have to confess that when I started, I didn't think that the problems were this complex. The problems are, once I started with this, it just wouldn't stop. It was like, it wasn't just one layer, it was 2 layers, 3 layers, 4 layers. And I mean, there were just so many problems. And so, I couldn't stop. And then of course, as the world changes, some things get better. Some new challenges come up. Some old challenges are solved, but then the new challenges come. And we always have to be reevaluating. We have to be looking. We have to be working with our partners. And we can't just take one single approach and expect that it's going to work forever because it's a good approach. No, it's always going to be changing with the times. And then it's always going to want to stay just slightly ahead to lead that change as we need them. So yeah, Midori and Friends continues, and it continues to evolve. And we are now working with a number of schools, some 50 schools or even more, depending on the year, sometimes as many as 70. This year, of course, because of COVID, we're doing online only. But in other years, we've had from instrumental instruction to different opportunities in band, ensemble, and we really didn't have anything virtual until this year. So this is a new development for us, which I hope will be able to continue to the extent that we can. But then also after the pandemic, to bring back the live. And we'll see, to balance this. And we've certainly learned a lot during this last 14 months. And there's certainly things that I think would work very well together with a live.
Great.
Absolutely. And Midori, like one thing I'm just very interested in is because of like the experiences that you've been able to have that from all your travels around the world and seeing people at many different stages of just real human suffering, in a way that in the United States you just don't experience. How, a concern I always have with classical musicians is that we get so lost inside the art form that we forget that it's about human emotion and human suffering and alleviating it. How, like from all these experiences, how do you think we could get, or you could get younger musicians that enter the field to think in this way, like you said, for Midori and Friends, to take not a single approach?
Well, I think many young musicians are very eager to learn, and I think it's our job, for those of us who have started in this path, to share with the younger musicians as well, or our colleagues, to encourage them to know more. And I think many young musicians today are very interested, and I think there are different opportunities available as well. There could be more, no question about that. But of course, hearing about it is one thing, but doing it together, experiencing it together, it's a totally different matter. And of course, the degree of motivation, the degree of inspiration is just, it's just completely something else.
And it can't be captured in words, right? It has to be through experience. I'm reminded I went to Jesuit high school growing up, and in order to graduate from year to year, you have to do 100 to 150 hours of community service. You cannot, it doesn't matter how your grades are, you cannot move from year to year. And so would you think, just to get younger musicians motivated to do the kind of thing you're suggesting, how would it be through something like that, or like how do you get a younger player who is spends 8 hours a day practicing intonation to
well, I think the desire is there. The desire is there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the desire is there, and sometimes the opportunities are needing to be discovered. But I actually would say that there's great need. There are many, many possibilities in the US right in your own neighborhood. It's much more than anything else, it's to connect with others through music. And so it's not about a particular place or going to a particular situation. First and foremost, it's about connecting with people through music. I realized so much that there are many issues to be tackled on here in the US, whether it's to do with going into children's situations, or the elderly, or the people who are in different conditions. There are many reasons. There are numerous reasons. I always made a point of working with people with disabilities. I've always made a point of going out to the correctional facilities, not necessarily going to places where people are able to come out so easily from their confined
What
situations.
inspired you to those two specific communities? Like the disabled community is a huge community in itself, but was there a specific story or situation that got you focused around that community and as well as correctional facilities?
I don't remember. I don't remember a particular moment. It just happened, and I continued doing it. Through music sharing, also visiting many hospitals, special institutions. And thanks to different possibilities with the internet, one can also do research. And once you're motivated and once you're able to have some keywords, and you also start to look, and there is a lot of information out there. And then of course, when I read about it or I learn about it, I want to know more and I want to be involved.
Yeah, actually, that's a kind of topic that is we debate on all the time. This idea of doing your research, or I always say it's doing your homework. I always get worried with younger players, younger musicians, but also just younger people, because you've grown up with the internet. The temptation to not do your homework and just uh, um, go with what is happening is quite strong. So I totally agree. Like, all the resources are there. The people suffering are literally just inside your house and outside, just right in your neighborhood. There are so many issues that one can solve. But how do you get somebody to want to focus on that, to even think about doing research? Like, what got you to start doing research in that direction?
I think I was always through the family, always interested in learning more about my community. And it was always a habit. Before the internet, there was a library. There were different resources. But I think there was always a habit. If there was something that struck a chord, and something made me more interested or compelled to find out more, I always did look for this kind of information. And I think also with a family background of really wanting to be a part of the community, wanting to learn about different sides of the community,
Sure.
different programs of the community, and why certain programs existed to support what kind of things, or for the aim of X, Y, and Z. I was just always interested in, what is this company doing? What is this institution doing? What is this hospital's interest? And then you go further and further from there.
Oh yeah, that's like, there's a hunger there. I totally vibe with that completely.
I think it's interesting because we talk about being aware of our world, our social surroundings, our the socioeconomic concerns of our communities, and it's just been interesting to observe, like, over the course of however many years, that those concerns and being aware of that is starting to overlap with music work more and more, right? And I think right now the reason why people like Christo, Brittany, and Andres and I we do this kind of work and follow in your footsteps, Midori, is because there's been a recognition on the part of artists that they could be doing more, and this is kind of like the evolving situation that I think you referenced earlier. But I wanted to ask about that. You mentioned music education being something that you see evolving, the needs of communities evolving. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What kinds of things you've seen develop over the last few years that's changed how you work?
Sure. So, about 28 years ago, when Midori and Friends started, there weren't so many organizations that were focusing on bringing music education to the schools, and that was still being developed. And there were organizations that were bringing performances or bringing kids into concert halls. And it was more like a children's concert at best. And I felt very strongly that we needed more than that. We need that, and we need other opportunities. So what does it mean to have good, solid music education? Used to be that perhaps if you've heard of the composers' names, Mozart and Beethoven, people went, "Oh, well, that's pretty good," from an 8-year-old for a 9-year-old. But then, as we get better at all of this, so we go more in depth. And then we think about, okay, well then just knowing the names of these composers isn't sufficient anymore. What does it mean to really understand some of these composers? Okay, well, you need to know maybe some works that these composers wrote. Maybe also a way to start hearing different performance styles of some of these works. Then also trying to see if one can play these pieces or to participate in a performance of these works. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Of course, you can't just tackle everything at once. It doesn't go into sort of playing the pieces together before you have gotten to the place where, yes, you get to know the composers, you get to know some of the pieces, you get to recognize some of the pieces, you get to recognize some of the styles. It has to come in steps. But once you start, you go a step further, a step further, a step further. And so do the kids who are learning. You can't just give them one sort of level of information. And I think young people are wonderful, children are wonderful, because the more they get into things, the more they would want, and the deeper you can go, and you can build on the knowledge. So that's how I kind of see it. And now, we have many more organizations that solely work, like Midori and Friends actually, that solely work on bringing music education. We're not a part of a presenting organization of performances with an educational department.
Right, your interest is not event production.
That's right. And then our interest is in making sure that we can bring music education to areas where it may not have so much access to orchestras or the education departments of the orchestras. That climate has definitely changed. Now we're talking about really working together, forming different partnerships, whether it's within the music education field or across different disciplines within the arts. Within music, we're talking about bringing together different styles of performing, different styles of music, different ways of approaching music, not just listening, but producing, creating, critiquing. That level is getting deeper and deeper. And I think that is something that I have seen as a major change in the last 20, 25 years.
Absolutely. I always feel like there's this hunger with youth for expanded creative expression, like a toolkit to be able to creatively express yourself. And then also like this need for encouragement and openness to vulnerability, which it's hard to grow up and figure out that being vulnerable is, synonymous with being strong. And there's something about learning an instrument that allows you to just develop your voice, pun intended in this case, through music, but also then personally for yourself. And so I feel like music education, the way you're describing, really does fill such a serious and important need.
Mm-hmm.
Brittany, as a student in music education at the college level,
not so much, but yes.
Well, in one sense, yeah.
No, yeah. Hearing all of that, I was just thinking of how that's basically just inclusion for people, bringing music education to everyone and having them be able to connect to works in ways that they may not have previously. And like you said, Midori, beyond just knowing what they are and who wrote it, but like why and how does that affect like what they feel and how they look at it. And I think that's really fantastic. I know that like Christo can relate in that, like, and all of us can relate definitely in that. That's what we do as, you know, performers and musicians ourselves. We don't just look at the composer and say, okay, well, this person wrote this and these are the notes and that's it, you know.
No,
And
it's always, it has the capacity to do so much more. And when I also think about my own background, how much music has really deepened my love for history, for example, and got me interested in so many different topics and themes and fields. It really has no boundaries. But just getting back a little bit, you know, to when I first started Midori and Friends. So one of the reasons why I wanted to start an organization rather than just doing myself, going out to the schools and giving, you know, workshops and lessons, was because I've always believed that there's so many different traditions that we have here in New York City, and also musically speaking, artistically, and that I didn't want this sort of my desire to bring music to the kids solely to be restricted to classical. So I wanted, you know, different representations. I wanted different styles of music that would reflect the culture, this really diverse, rich culture that we have in New York City. So we've always had, now, you know, classical music, I'm like, okay, don't forget us, even within Midori and Friends. But, you know, in some ways we have to fight for our presence, the classicals, you know. But then we've always had flamenco, we've always had drumming, we've always had flute ensemble from China, Bangladesh, and all different, you know, we have wonderful communities here in New York City that really have such wonderful traditions as well, that we can all, you know, we can all get enriched by these experiences, to learn from each other and to learn about ourselves actually by, you know, exchanging. And so, you know, this is one thing that I'm very, very proud of at Midori and Friends, that we're able, as an organization that is not attached to a particular orchestra of certain styles or a particular presenting organization of particular you know, particular styles again, that we're able to really bring in. We are wide open and we're able to do this. We don't have to restrict ourselves to a certain genre. So, I mean, I see this as definitely a blessing.
I would agree. Honestly, I love hearing that there's so many. I was going to ask about that actually, that there's just so many different styles. And I'd love to hear more about like your thoughts on how you mentioned, oh, don't forget classical music. But also, I say this every week, I'm very much on dismantling the canon and kind of just removing that idea. So what are your thoughts on ways that we can maybe expand or reframe some of these classics, as you mentioned, so that they're not forgotten?
Well, I think that Alan may agree or disagree. I think, you know, when we were playing in Vietnam or in Japan, in different institutions or orphanages or schools, we might have had repertoire that people would react, well, isn't that kind of difficult? You know, but I think it's just really a matter of presentation. I like to see this variety, whether it's across disciplines or within the discipline or within our program. I like to see great contrast, and yet there's always going to be this sort of ongoing thread, right? So something that, you know, we can talk about our feelings, a piece that allows us to talk about rhythm and get them going, get the listeners going, or sounds that were considered not so traditional in the beginning but became very much a part of what we do. It's really about how we hear, how we present, and how we decide to work with the materials that we have. So I don't necessarily think that we always have to just play things that are traditional, so to say, or considered to be the classics. We have a wide range too. And then we also have to present well. We have to actually perform well. We are always trying to get kids engaged or people engaged. Also to be able to really bring it to them as well. So I think it was in Vietnam where we actually went to individual homes in the villages before we actually had the concert, and we play a little bit and serve that as our greeting to the community. And we're here, we're going to play this concert, please come and join us, rather than just sort of expecting people to gather for the concert or the presentation. So there are many different ways. I also feel that it's very important that when we're going out to these institutions or schools, villages, that really what's underneath in my thoughts is that we're there to receive and we're there to experience together. It's not so much of, okay, this is great music, and here I'm, wanting to give it to you. It's never that. It's not so much about giving it, but it's more receiving. And even this warm smile that we get, just a little hint of a smile, a big smile, it depends, that for the first time somebody hears a sound from a stringed instrument, and it just sort of, almost this mesmerized look. It's precious. But then that you reach somebody, for that kind of reaction to happen. And for me to be able to experience that, for us to be able to experience that, to have been there, it's a gift.
I love that.
Yes, it really is.
I wanted to ask, with the question about classical music, it's just in general, among all of these different genres, is there something about classical music that you think is worth sharing with these kids? Because my question is, why stand up for classical music? Not to be like an argumentative in any way, but because I definitely have feelings for it. But what is it about classical music that you think is really important to share with, especially communities that have never heard the violin before or any classical?
Well, the thing is, for I think for those that have never heard classical music, I don't think it's important to let them know that this is classical music. It's just music, right?
Yes.
And music that actually sort of makes us want to dance or to sing or to kind of wonder what's going on or to even wince, It doesn't matter whether it's classical or not. It's sounds, it's effective sound. It's effective sound, and not only that, but we're creating these sounds with our hands through our instruments. It's a magical effect, I think.
And it's non-amplified. Like, I always find that the most magical part too. Just like,
well, it could be amplified, but most of the time it's not.
Yeah, but I remember I had this experience once with a few at-risk youth in Boston, seeing an orchestra for the first time. 100 human souls playing instruments, and they had never heard anything that loud, non-amplified in their lives. And one of the kids literally dropped his mouth and said, "That is the shit." I was like, That's right. That's the experience that we're going for. And it's like there aren't that many opportunities to get that kind of like human expression that is not technological. Mm-hmm. Which I always think is so special to, orchestras and chamber groups. My gosh.
Mm-hmm. One thing about classical music is that we have an idea of who wrote the music, when this music was being written, or what sort of was going on around that time. And, for me, this is a personal thing, but I always felt connected through music to different periods of time, different cultures, different countries. I grew up thinking that these composers were my friends. And so, it's just getting to know a friend. And when you get to know a friend, you also get to know about his or her life or what surrounds his or her life.
Right.
Right. And it was a wonderful way to connect, actually.
Become invested in them in a very deep way.
And then something that's beyond or everyday in a way. Why did Beethoven not wear a wig? Okay, and where does a wig come from for Mozart? What was that made out of? Or
did it smell?
yeah, or what was Bach really like? Why did he go to jail at one point? All these things, and you start to think and about instrument makers and all these things. Bartok, what kind of life he had, Prokofiev, and how he wrote stories as well as music, and then he wrote about the Eiffel Tower with legs, that started to walk. And I don't know how old he was, but he wrote a story like that. Why? What was going on in this guy's mind? And you start to think, and the imagination takes over. Or Tchaikovsky and the ballet score, Stravinsky. So it's just the possibility through music for me, classical music, because we actually know how these pieces were written or who wrote them, when they were written, and have an idea what they were like. And I think we have individual understanding of some of these composers through the pieces we get to play. But it's a possibility for us to sort of be cross-temporal, cross-generational, right. Cross-cultural, and I think it's really, for me, this was always it's like a little extra trip.
Yeah, well, and I think it kind of brings back that point about subjectivity and ambiguity, because I feel like classical music has such an interesting power. Because you're right, like the tradition can be so specific, and you can know so much about the lives of the composers and how the piece is written, how it's been played for the last 300 years. But there's this, on the other side, this entire layer of ambiguity that allows for so much innovation at every level. And it just makes it so inspiring to be a part of. And I was just thinking about an orchestra I was a part of a few years ago where there were 90 countries represented in the orchestra. And I thought, where does that happen? Where else can that really happen? Except in like a kind of organism like an orchestra where you have ambiguity and specificity at the same time.
This theme of subjectivity, I mean, it keeps coming up, and for very good reason. But I just wanted to throw out there that I think it's really just fascinating, incredible, and wonderful that you got a psych degree, if I recall. Is that right?
Yes, I've been meaning to ask you about that.
Yes, my
why psychology?
degree.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that came as a surprise, so to say. So when I started my university, I had no idea what I wanted to study. And my guess was that it was going to be somewhere in the arts. I had gone into university, and one thing I knew was I was not going to actually major in music. I thought art history, maybe cultural studies, maybe education, arts education, something in the arts, I thought. But through the liberal arts core, I had to take something to fulfill my quota for that in social sciences. And, basically, for some of these courses you take, you end up taking something that fits your schedule the best, right? Because it just works. And you have to be honest with yourself. There are certain courses you take because it fits and you need that credit, right? Well, intro to psychology was one of those courses.
Wow.
And just psychology, what's that? I had no idea. And Freud, never really heard of before. Melanie Klein, who's that? And Jung, who, I had no idea. And so
this is getting into the depth of subjectivity.
and then I took this intro to psychology, who actually, I remember this very well. The first class, the professor brought his dog. who was supposedly a genius, according to the
The
professor.
professor or the dog? Oh, okay.
The dog said the professor said that the dog was a genius and that he was supposedly a child prodigy as a young boy. He said,
Pigs want to know
whatever.
all this.
I remember that, but then I got
Wow.
fascinated with the topic, and then I said, well, actually, I want to learn more about this. And then it's like, okay, what's nurtured and what's nature, what's sort of there and what's cultivated. And I got into all these questions. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to take a couple more courses.
Wow.
And then before I knew it, that's what I ended up doing. And then there was yet another course that I took, again, more for convenience and fulfilling the quota for, needing that credit to graduate. And it also said in the syllabus that, we'll be able to go to some theater performances and tickets will be provided. I said, well, this is a good idea because I've always loved the theater. And so I took the course, and it turned out to be examining different plays and theatrical works from a very gender perspective. Wow. And so I was like, okay, I had no idea what that was, but I get to go to the theater. Good. And I took the course, really got interested again. And then so I decided to take more courses in gender studies. And so gender studies was sort of like my minor area, and then psychology remained my major area. But that's how I did my undergrad. And then I wasn't quite finished when I was graduating from college. I didn't think that I was ready to just let that go and to get out of an academic institution. So I decided to go on to grad school. And then in grad school, I did just psychology, general psychology.
Does that inform?
Oh yeah, you're gonna ask the exact question I'm gonna ask.
Well, then you go ahead, Christo.
No, please, Alan.
I mean, feel free, Midori, to be as broad or specific as you want. But does this still inform? Does this side of your life still inform your work today and your performance and how you approach music?
I think it does it does have its presence. It shows its presence, I think, especially when I'm teaching, in the way I'm explaining things to the student, or in the way that I think about how we think we're doing one thing. This is getting to the really, the nuts and bolts of playing as a practicing musician, but what we think we're doing, is it really going out? How is that being interpreted? Is it being communicated? What is communication? And trying to explain all these things, I think I do go back to some of the things I learned through psychology. And then also this sort of, it's basically sitting in the library all the time. And this is before the internet really erupted, right? And started to change our lives so much. We had the internet, but it was all analog connection. So, just sort of going into the library, staying there, doing the research, and as I did my research, of course, I'll be looking for something, but then along the way, I'll fall upon other things I'll be interested in, and I'll start picking up this book, that book, and start reading and all kinds of things. That was the beauty of actually studying in the library. But I think my desire to search for this information, and along the way to actually not to disregard everything else that comes along with it. This is actually going right back to the days that I spent so many hours and so many nights actually in the NYU library, at the Bob's Library.
Doing your homework, as it were.
Supposedly doing my homework, but really reading about everything else, that I was supposed to be learning about.
Well, it sounds like there's so much more that we could learn about you and about the work that you're doing. But we've reached the hour mark.
Oh, wow. That disappeared.
Yeah. I'm a little sad, more than a little sad right now. But yes, this has been a wonderful hour with Midori. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your
insights. Such a joy to get to work with you on a partnership with Eureka.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you live in person, Alan, very soon, to start working on our quartets.
Huge privilege as always.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Christo, do we have a chord for the end, or are we?
No, we don't do chords at the end.
We don't do chords at the end. Okay. All right. Well, to those of you who are listening and watching, thank you so much for joining us. And this is going to be available afterwards, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah.
absolutely.
So if you want to, if you couldn't make the whole thing or any part of it this evening, you can check back in later, and we'll have it accessible on our website. So
Thanks, everybody.
thank you.